Unfound is brought to you by its supporters at Patreon, PayPal, and YouTube, along with its gracious advertisers. Roy Gregory Brooks Jr. was a 21-year-old from Casselberry, Florida. He disappeared from there on January 18th, 2000. A day later, police found Greg's car in the Tampa area. It yielded no clues as to what happened to him. On February 16th, 2018, Unfound first covered Greg's disappearance. Today, we revisit the still unsolved case with the original interview, but with a revised theme and new commentary. I'm Ed Denzel, and this is Unfound. When Unfound first had Greg's mother on the podcast way back in early 2018, we had only presented about 70 disappearances. This was well before Tom Brown, Steve Pankey, the Unfound think tank on Patreon, my mother's death, COVID, and a bunch of other things that have affected my life both inside and outside the world of podcasting. Now, this weekly program has covered over 280 disappearances. But most importantly, since February 16th, 2018, and even recently, we have featured some cases that, on the surface at least, seem very much like Greg's. A few questionable characters, the missing person going through some things, a vehicle found miles away, and no signs of violence. What are some of those? Jamie Valdez, Keith Call, and Sandra Haley, Paul Sanders, to name just a few. Now that we know about these disappearances, can we look at Greg's in a new light to determine what happened to him and where the reinvestigating should start? And now a new summary of the case. This is brought to you by my friend Megan Linus' website, charleyproject.org. Greg Brooks was raised in a good family in Central Florida that included a younger brother. He worked and went to school and did well at both. However, in the months, if not couple years before Greg went missing, some things did not go his way. He went to college but dropped out when he discovered hazing was part of the process there. Greg and his longtime girlfriend broke up in 1999. From this and more, Greg developed depression symptoms, but his family's perception was that those issues were in the past and 2000 would be a good year for him. So, on the evening of January 18th, 2000, Greg left for his movie theater job, believing he was to be working that night. Upon arrival, he discovered he wasn't on the schedule. So Greg picked up his check and went to Winn-Dixie to cash it. From there, he stopped at one of his favorite fast food places, Crystal's. His family expected him home by 1 a.m., January 19th. Greg never returned. He was never seen again. Less than 12 hours later, but over 2 hours away, police discovered his car on Sun City Boulevard in the Ruskin area of Florida near Tampa. Although at the time, law enforcement did not know the car was part of a missing persons case. They did forensics on the vehicle and went on searches in the immediate area. Neither action brought forth any idea of what could have happened to Greg. We revisit disappearances on Unfound because I want to make sure everybody knows we never forget the missing people we featured early in this podcast's existence who are still missing. We also do this because we are all more experienced now than we were back then. with this hopefully leading to new lines of insight. So please put those new IQ points to work as you try to answer these 3 questions during the interview. Number 1, Greg wouldn't have really cashed a $200 check then committed suicide right after that, would he? Number 2, was the stop at Winn-Dixie really about the money, or was it about something else? And number 3, can the behaviors of 2 of Greg's best friends be explained given how his mother portrayed them in the interview? Greg's family is still not sure what to think 23 years later. The interview you hear today will be the one from 2018 with Greg's mother, Geraldine Brooks. Unfound news. I'm sad to inform you that the body of Daniel Villarreal was discovered at the end of February, not far from where his wreck occurred. I can't go into details at this time, but whether Daniel's death was foul play or not has not yet been established. Last year, we featured his disappearance from the Phoenix area. Next, the newest episode of Unfound Now has been released to the public on YouTube. It is the disappearance of John Tipton. Coincidentally, John was found deceased earlier this week, right around the same time the episode came out. Finally, I continue to work on my teachable course, How to Podcast Better Than Anyone. I've even had some of you give me some opinions on a logo for the course. Thank you for the help. I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound the mother of Roy Gregory Brooks Jr., Geraldine Brooks. Geraldine, welcome to Unfound.
Thank you.
Tell the listeners a little bit about your son, Greg. I know his official name is Roy Gregory Brooks Jr., but for the course of this conversation, we're going to call him Greg. That's how you knew him, how his family knows him, how his friends know him. So tell the listeners a little bit about Greg.
Okay. My son was a very likable young man. He met people and immediately he was friends or friendly with them. I would like to think that he didn't have any enemies or anyone who did not like him because he was always helping people. He was always friendly to people. He was one of those young people in school, which I didn't have problems with him as far as in school or anything like that. He was a member of the band, which he really, really loved being in the band at Lima High School. He played drums, and he loves to play drums. So he also liked working on his car. He put big speakers in his car to play music loud, and he was just an ordinary teenager growing up in high school. He went to college at Florida.
Go ahead.
He went to college.
And where'd he go?
He went to Florida A&M, University in Tallahassee, Florida. And he really looked forward to being a part of the band there because he had been groomed all these years since middle school to be a part of the band. But because of some hazing issues, he did not wish to participate after that. So he was not a part of the band that he had looked forward to all those years.
And that is interesting because if the listeners will remember, within the last few years, Florida A&M has gotten in trouble for hazing that went on in amongst the music department, the band. Within the last few years, it got in big, big trouble. It was a national story, as I remember.
Right, it was.
That's something of a coincidence. Did Greg have any brothers or sisters? Do you have any other children, Geraldine?
Yes. I have one other son who's 5 years younger than Greg. His name is Jermaine. And He has that same kind of likable personality where people just kind of like him because he gets along well with others. He's a little funny at times, and he just enjoyed being with his friends.
And I guess Greg and Jermaine were good buddies. Was Greg a good older brother, good mentor for Jermaine?
Yes, he was, because when you think of a young man in high school going on a date to the movie with his girlfriend, he would take his younger brother. He would take Jermaine usually wherever he went, not all the time, but he did spend a lot of time with him. He taught him things like playing basketball. He would play basketball with him. They were very close to be the number of years difference, but they were very close brothers.
That's interesting. He would take his younger brother when he went out with his girlfriend. I've never heard of that before, Geraldine. That's kind of unique.
Yes, it is, but that's how much he loved his brother. And I would even question him and say, "You sure you want to take Jermaine with you?" And he would say, "Oh, yes." And, the girls liked Jermaine too, so they didn't care. So he would go on the date with them to the movies.
Okay, that's certainly interesting. So he went to college, and did he have a girlfriend, and how did he do there? That's over in Tallahassee, which is, some distance away from where he grew up there in Casselberry. What went on there once he got to his higher education?
Well, he would come home quite frequently on the weekends. He and his girlfriend, who was Janet, they were able to continue the relationship probably through the first year that he was at college, because he came home a lot. So he would come home to see her, and of course, at that time, they were sending cards and writing letters and phone calls, so they did communicate quite a bit, even though he was away.
And how long were he and Janet a couple? I guess, were they a couple when they were in high school and then he went to college, or did this something that developed after that? Do you remember?
Yes, they were a couple in high school, probably at least the junior and senior year. I do remember Janet going to the prom with him. So, yes, they were a couple in high school and then through the first year of college.
Okay. And so he gets to Tallahassee, Florida A&M, was going to be in the band, but as we already talked about, some issues there, and I'm no fan of hazing, of course, either, and I was a musician at one time. I wouldn't put up with that stuff either. So I perfectly understand how Greg might have wanted to stay away from that. I think that shows a strong character on his part. But how did he do with his education there?
Well, the first year he did well. He was happy, and he had met new friends, and he enjoyed it. Things were going well. But then with the breakup of he and Janet, it kind of made him very sad or maybe depressed. So that was one thing that really, really bothered him, because he really liked this young lady who he had dated through high school, and she broke up with him. So I think that made it even, more, how can I put it, stressful, or made him more sad because of the fact that she broke up with him, and also informed him that she was dating someone else.
I'm sure he did take it hard, especially, the distance, him being away so many hours away. And once again, for the listeners, Casselberry is nowhere near Tallahassee. Especially back in the year 2000, there was no email and internet, FaceTime, anything like that. So relationships, especially among young people, it's going to be a little difficult. Were Greg and Janet in the same grade, or was she younger than he was?
She was younger.
Yeah.
So when he was in college, she was in her senior year of high school.
Yeah. So that would be tough. She's still in high school, he's in college. It happens.
Right.
And so that probably affected his grades, as it does a lot of kids, even to this day. Get into a relationship, grades are going to suffer if things don't go as well as they should. And then I'm sure maybe he didn't feel too good that, she not just broke up with him, but started going out with somebody else. So what happened with that? So his grades dipped some, and did he continue to go to school? What was he telling you at the time this was going on?
Well, he told me he was very sad. I could tell he was very sad about it. He talked about it. And the second semester of the second year, which actually ended in December, he did not return because his grades had dropped, and he ended up on academic suspension. So he did not return for that following semester, which would have been in January 2000.
Okay.
So instead, he was at home.
Okay. So he, at the time of his disappearance, which is January 18th, 2000, if he had continued to go to college, he would have maybe been back in Tallahassee at that time.
Correct. He would have.
Okay. So Greg's back at home, but he has a job. Tell the listeners a little bit about the job that he had, how long he had it, and did he enjoy it?
Yes, he enjoyed it because he liked meeting people. He had a job working at the Regal Theater in Winter Park, Florida, which is about 20 minutes from where we live. It was a brand new theater, so he was among the first employees that were hired, and he enjoyed going to work. He enjoyed meeting the people who came in. He actually worked at the concession stand, so he enjoyed doing that. Also, with working there, he would get to see movies free, so he was happy about that also because he enjoyed going to the movies.
Sure, I'd be happy about that too. Sure. And so he was back living at home. How would you say he was doing? Mentally, I mean, once again, not going back to school, a little bit of a change, living at home. Was he still suffering a little bit from his girlfriend breaking up with him, would you say?
Yes, he was. He wasn't as happy as he normally would be. He was usually a really kind of funny guy that likes to joke sometimes, make people laugh, play around. But I didn't see that in him at this time. He was very sad, or maybe depressed to a certain degree because of this happening to him, because she was someone who he really liked and cared about.
Okay. So we come up to, so he's didn't go back to school, but he's working, theater job with a lot of young kids. Not unusual for young people to have the type of employment. We get up to January 18th, 2000. What do you remember about that day?
Okay, I remember coming from work. Greg was at home. My other son was at home also. This was a particular night where I had to go to a meeting at Lima High School because at the time I was on that committee there. And I talked to him. I asked him if he, had to work that evening, and he wasn't sure. He said he didn't check the schedule, and he decided to go to work, to check the schedule, and pick up his paycheck, which, assuming that he probably would have to work. So that's why he went to the job to check his schedule and also for the paycheck.
Sure.
Well, when I came home from the meeting, which was around 8 or so, I wasn't too concerned. He had not come back home, but I just assumed that, okay, if he didn't come back then he probably had to work. So he always came home on time. Usually he'd get home about 1:30, something like that, because he had to stay until the theater closed and then, assist with the cleanup and everything to prepare for the next day. So that means that he got home late. On this particular night, I noticed that he didn't come home. So when I looked at my clock, it was like 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was like, oh my goodness, he hasn't come home yet. I became very nervous because this was quite unusual for him.
Sure.
But I knew it was too soon to contact the police. If I call them, they'll probably say, oh, well, he's just out with his friends or something like that. But I did have this feeling that something was not right because this was quite unusual for him not to come home and not to come home on time.
So it's 3 a.m. He's not home. You knew something wasn't right. Knew the police wouldn't do anything right at that time. So I suppose you tried to go to bed. I'm sure you're very worried as a mother. What then happens the next day? And we'll go back through what you found out, but what happened then the next day, January 19th?
Well, after my son didn't come home, I went to the police station and I filled out a missing persons report that my son did not come home. So at the time, they filled out the report. They say they were going to put out, the missing persons report. So whatever they do, I guess they put it on their police line or whatever so that other policemen or other counties or whatever can see that person is missing. And I also had the car tag for his car, and that was put on there also, notification. So they would be in search for the car.
Sure.
So the next day, I didn't hear anything that day, but the next day, I was contacted and told that the car was found in Sun City near Tampa.
Yes.
And the car had been there overnight, but they didn't know it was a missing car because the police at that time put a sticker on the car, a red sticker, because they thought the car had broken down, and they put the sticker there so that the owner would have to move it within the 24 hours once they put the sticker on.
Sure. Or it'll get towed. Or it'll get towed.
Yes, that's true. Or it'll get towed. Mm-hmm. But once the license number was through their publication or notification system that the police used, they saw the tag, and then they noticed that was the car that was missing. So at the time, they realized in I'm going to say Tampa, but it's Sun City near Tampa,
yes, that
the car was missing. Then the police had the car towed away from the site where it was.
Now, if I may just set this kind of up for the listeners, Casselberry, where I guess you still live to this day, and where Greg lived, is on the other side of Orlando. It's on the far side of Orlando from Tampa. Checked it on Google Maps. It's about a 2-hour drive, maybe a little less than that, from Casselberry to Sun City, where his car was found. And Sun City, for the listeners, is an area to the southeast of Tampa. It's kind of a city area. Of course, it's not a big city like Tampa, but it is an area where quite a few people live, and it's right along the I-75, which runs north and south in Florida. So that's where the car was found, and it was found in the median of the main street in Sun City, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
And it was parked right outside of one of the major restaurant chains at that time, which was visible, that people could see that the car was there. Mm-hmm. And when we found out, my ex-husband and I and Greg's father, we went down to pick up the car. They said we could go down and pick up the car. we took flyers down. We went through the city. We went in the stores, like Publix and other stores, putting up flyers, asking people did they see our son, did they know anything about him. But there was this restaurant where the car was parked. There was a waitress there that said she remembers seeing the car there in front of the restaurant, but she did not remember seeing Greg. So even though the car was there on a busy street, people just don't pay attention to people who are, I guess, getting out of cars or whatever, but they do remember that the car was there.
Right. And it, just to be clear, though, it wasn't necessarily in a parking place. It was actually in an area where nobody would normally park their car. Maybe a car if it was broken down or something, but it was not in the parking lot of a Walmart. It wasn't in the parking lot of a Dunkin' Donut. It was like out on the street in that grassy area between the roads going each direction.
Right.
Okay.
Like a divider or median where, traffic flows one way and then the other way, and it was right there in the middle.
Okay.
And it is a busy street.
Let me just ask you a question, a couple questions about that waiting period between about, I guess, 3 in the morning on January 19th until January 20th when the police from Sun City, I guess, got in contact with the Casselberry police, who then alerted you to the car. Did you hear from any of Greg's friends? Did you try calling any of them? Maybe did you try to call maybe his ex-girlfriend, Janet? Did you talk to anybody that day? Anybody able to give you any indications of anything? Did anybody try contacting you saying, hey, I was supposed to meet Greg somewhere, and anything like that?
No one called me. No one said that they needed to meet him or they had seen him. And that's quite a mystery to me because he had one friend in particular whose name is Mike. Michael, we call him Mike, who's very, very close to Greg. And he never contacted me about Greg missing. He just never contacted me. And I felt kind of strange about that it was unusual because they were always together. They called themselves cousins. And he never came back and asked anything about Greg. And even to this day, 18 years later, he has never contacted me and asked me, did anything come up of Greg or was he ever found or anything like that. And I was hurt, yes, because he was like another son to me. He came to our house for dinner. He spent the night at our house. He was always riding in the car with Greg. And I just felt really, really hurt that he never came and said anything. And it also made me feel that was quite unusual that you would have such a close friend that you find out that your friend is missing and you never call his mom, you never come by the house, you never talk to his brother or anyone. It's almost like he just disappeared from the friendship. So I don't know whatever happened with him.
Okay, but in that day, though, on January 19th, did you ever think about calling him instead? Did it ever occur to you to do that?
No, I didn't call him on January 20th because, number one, I didn't have contact information for him. Remember, these young people did not have cell phones at that time. And I just didn't. No, I did not contact him. There was no Facebook. There was no cell phone. I did not have his personal contact information, like if he was living with his mother or whatever. I didn't have any of that.
Okay. So that January 19th, once again, January 19th, the day after, not the day you didn't know about the car. You just knew that your son didn't come home, didn't know about the car yet. Just in that day, it sounds to me like you were just kind of sitting tight, just sitting at home, hoping Greg was going to come through the door at any second. Did you happen to call his work and talk to them?
I actually went to the job.
Okay.
I actually went there to find out about my son. Did he actually report? Was anybody with him? Did he work that night? And of course, the answers were no. No one was with him. When he came, he picked up his check. He was by himself. He did not have to work that evening. So that was kind of like a dead end with that, because everything to the job was like, okay, he came in, he picked up his check, he left.
Now, I should ask you this, and we've talked about this. As the listeners know, I do quite a bit of talking to my guests before they are interviewed officially, as we're doing it here. You were under the impression that Greg, or maybe Greg was under the impression that he was working that night, but then you show up there to his work on January 19th, and they say, no, that he didn't work. Is that surprising to you? Do you think that he got confused? How do you view that all these years later, that maybe he thought he was supposed to be working, but he didn't end up working?
Well, sometimes he did not check the schedule when he should check the schedule. But yes, that was unusual, because all the other times he knew what his work schedule was, and he knew the days that he needed to work. On this particular time, he wasn't sure. He wasn't sure. I'm not sure whether this was the day that they put out the new schedule, or all I know is he wasn't sure on that particular day whether he was to work that evening or not. And I wasn't sure either, because that's why I asked him, are you supposed to work today? And then he said he was going to go and check. And, of course, he picked up his paycheck from, I don't know what the payday was, but he did have a paycheck there.
Okay.
So he did pick up a paycheck.
All right. And everybody should know that January 18th, 2000 is a Tuesday.
Okay.
It was not a weekend. And you had also told me that, just in case, though, you had told me that Greg kind of always had his work clothes, I guess, that'd be in his car, just in case. Was always prepared. So even if he went there and he found out that he was actually working, he could just change right into his work clothes, no problem.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, he could.
Okay. So he didn't have to work, and that's the reason that he got his check, and he left. And we just aren't sure at this second. Well, we are going to get to that. So we get to January 19th. You had gone in, talked to them. Yes, he had come in by himself, got his check. January 20th is when the police called you. His car is found. What do? You already told the listeners that you went down to Sun City, looked around, posted some flyers, talked to a woman that worked at this restaurant. She hadn't seen anything. What did the car look like? Where was it when you got it? Did they actually end up towing it anyway? What can you tell us about the car itself?
We picked up the car from the tow yard where the police had it towed. So we went and picked up the car. We didn't see anything wrong with the car. We didn't see any damage or anything of that nature. We never found the keys, though. We never found the keys to the car. And the way we were able to drive the car back was that we had an extra set of keys for the car. But we never found the keys, Greg's keys.
Mm-hmm.
So we have no idea what happened with that. We brought the car back. We thought maybe he had run out of gas. All these things go through your mind. Yeah. Maybe the car broke down. Maybe he ran out of gas. He had some mechanical issues and he got out, and maybe he was trying to get help or walking to get help, or all those things went through my mind. Mm-hmm. But once we got there, we realized that there was nothing wrong with the car.
Did it have gas in it? Did it have gas?
It had enough gas. I can't remember exactly how much. It wasn't like it had run out of gas. The car started right up with no problem. We were able to drive it to the gas station and get more gas to drive it back to Casselberry. So that was something else that was unusual. I was puzzled as to why my son would leave his car there and there was nothing wrong. And even if there was something wrong, he would have called me. He would have gone to a store or somewhere. He would have found a way to call me so that we could go there and get the car, or some way for him to get back home. I thought that was quite unusual, that for him to just leave the car like that and nothing wrong with it.
So you saw the car, you got into the car not long after it was found. Anything missing from the car? I mean, back in 2000, maybe people would have like music CDs in their car or anything like that. Anything missing? You had told the listeners already they had worked on his car and put, I guess, expensive speakers, louder speakers in it. Anything missing in the car? Any signs of, frankly, violence in the car? Anything that you thought was unusual when you got to sit in it?
Nothing was unusual in the car. Nothing was missing from the car.
Okay.
The speakers were there. The CDs was there. It was not vandalized in any way.
No. And the only thing that was really missing from it was the key.
Right.
The key that starts it and runs it. Okay. Now, the next piece of information that kind of led you in a direction was there was a receipt from Winn-Dixie. Why don't you tell the listeners about this? This is another piece of the puzzle trying to put together what Greg did after he went to get his check at the movie theater. What can you tell listeners about that?
A receipt from Winn-Dixie where he cashed his check was found in his car, which the receipt was a little over $200 that he had cashed. The cashier at that time, his name was Karen, remembers seeing Greg come in and cash in the check. The Winn-Dixie is probably about 3 to 4 miles from where we live, so we often went to Winn-Dixie. So she had seen him before. Mm-hmm. So she remembers seeing him because she said she saw him and she was the one who cashed the check.
Right.
Well, the question came up is, was he alone? So when the detective, Casselberry detective, requested to get the tape that Winn-Dixie uses in the store, it was discovered that the tape had been taped over. So the day that Greg went in to cash his check was not on the tape. It was no longer on the tape. I questioned them about that. They said it wasn't unusual for a store to, that somebody forgot to take the tape out. And it wasn't unusual. It happens sometimes. So it was taped over. I'll just put it like that.
Okay. So
we did not know if someone was with him when he cashed the check, whether somebody followed him to his car after he cashed the check. Those are questions that we still have not answered.
Okay. Now, do you find it maybe a little strange that he would go, remember, this was a Tuesday. It wasn't like it was like a Friday night where, he might have to wait till Monday to maybe go to a bank. And you had told me that he did have a checking and savings account. Do you find it unusual that he went and got that check cashed and was walking around with $200-some? You being his mother, a little surprised by that?
Yes, I was a little surprised because I was wondering, why did he go to Winn-Dixie to cash the check? I can't answer for that because, yes, he did have a checking and a savings account. He would often go and cash his check and deposit money in his checking account, savings account. But on this particular night, and especially the time that he went in Winn-Dixie, the bank was closed. So he did go to Winn-Dixie and cash the check. Now, it could possibly be that because the young lady who he had dated, Janet, was working in Winn-Dixie. So maybe he just thought, well, I'll go to Winn-Dixie, cash my check, and then I'll get a chance to see Janet. I'm not sure.
This is, and to remind the listeners, this is the girl who was his girlfriend. She broke up with him for another guy, and Greg, as you said, maybe still a little bit down at that point, and he was using this check cashing thing as a way to kind of just suddenly show up at Winn-Dixie and run into her.
Yes, that's a possibility.
It's a possibility.
Right.
Have you? I know that you've talked to Janet. Did Greg and Janet have a conversation that night that Greg went to Winn-Dixie? What did she say?
They have had conversations, yes. I'm not sure what the conversation was. It could be just hi or hello or something of that nature, but I'm not sure the extent of the conversation.
Okay, and we have to remember she is at work. It's not like she can just stand there and talk to Greg for a half an hour or something. She has a job to do. But could she, you already mentioned this woman who remembers Greg from cashing his check there, but Janet was there. Did she say was it just a hi? I mean, how much did she tell you if it was just in passing? What do you remember about talking to her about that, if you can say?
Well, when I talked to Janet about did she know anything or anything about Greg, she didn't know anything. She didn't know anything. She just says, no, I don't know anything. I don't know anybody who has known anything. So it's just like nothing from there.
Okay. Did she admit seeing him that night when he went in to cash his check? Did she see him?
Yes.
Okay, she did. Okay. So he goes in there, gets a check cashed. We don't know for what reason, being that maybe that... Did you ever know him to ever cash his check at Winn-Dixie before? Or was that something that surprised you?
That was the first time that I've known him to cash his check at Winn-Dixie. Yes. Okay. It was a surprise.
Okay. Now, there was something else that was discovered, that was not the last place that Greg ended up after going to get his check cashed. It seems that he went from the theater to Winn-Dixie, and then he went to this place called Crystal's that I'm unfamiliar with, but you are very familiar with it. How did you find out that he ended up at this restaurant, I guess in the Casselberry area?
Right. Crystal's is a fast food restaurant, and it's in a lot of different areas, but it's close by the house. He went through the drive-through there to get his food. He often did eat out, especially like if he had a paycheck, he would go to, it was either Crystal's, Burger King, or McDonald's to go pick up something, fast food. When I went to Crystal's and I was giving out flyers, talking to the workers there, and the one of the workers, who I don't have her name right now, I don't remember, but she did say that she remembered seeing him that night at Crystal, getting his food. She remembers him. Well, here again, Greg went to these places frequently, so, it's not like they wouldn't remember him. So they saw him, they remember him because they've seen him.
Okay. And that was something that you discovered on your own. That was something not that the police discovered. You discovered that, and maybe you could almost say a little bit by accident, because you were just canvassing the area and went to this place, and the woman said, "Oh yeah, I remember your son."
Right.
That's how you remember. That's how that was discovered. So do you remember the time frame of all this? Do you know, just once in general? We don't have to get into the absolute specifics, but what time do you think that he ended up at the theater? What time do you think that he ended up at Winn-Dixie? And what time do you think that he ended up at the restaurant? Was that all within maybe like 2 hours of each other? Pretty quickly?
Probably. I do know that the receipt had a time, which was a little after 7, where he cashed his check at Winn-Dixie, so that was around 7. And then I'm assuming that once he got the money, the cash, then he went to get something to eat, which would have been probably within the 30 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, something, because they're all in close proximity. Okay. But we don't know what happened after that. All we know is the car ended up in Sun City.
Right, sometime after that. And we're going to get back to the car in a moment. Sometimes fast food places have video cameras. Did Crystal's happen to have a video camera that might have been pointed at everybody going through the drive-thru? That maybe is that something you even thought of? And did the woman who remembered your son, was he alone?
Well, I don't recall whether I asked her if he was alone. I just asked if she remembers seeing my son at the restaurant. I'm thinking that possibly she would have said, well, yes, I saw him with another person, but that conversation didn't take place. So I'm assuming that he was alone. He was alone when he went to Winn-Dixie. And I'm thinking that he left Winn-Dixie, went straight to Crystal, but he could have had someone there in the car with him. It just didn't come up. And as far as the question, is any sort of video camera pointed toward people in the drive-thru area, I'm guessing that was a dead end, or maybe they just didn't do that, which is possible. I don't know if they even had a camera at Crystal then.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I didn't ask that. I just was concerned about trying to trace his steps. Sure. Where did he go?
Sure. And probably, I'm guessing when you happened upon that place and went in there and somebody, recognized your son, probably thinking about a tape or something probably was the last thing on your mind. I'm sure at the point you were just happy to hear that, oh, he was at Winn-Dixie and then he ended up here.
Right.
You were probably pretty happy about that. Okay.
Because whatever information I found out, I would give it to Casselberry Police, hoping that they would follow up on it. And that didn't always happen.
Sure.
Because I guess the information that I gave, maybe they couldn't use it or whatever. Because actually, the tape, the Winn-Dixie tape, I kept insisting that they look at the tape to see if anyone was with him or if anyone followed him out. And finally, they did go to Winn-Dixie for the tape. But by that time, the tape had been taped over.
Yeah.
Because Winn-Dixie wasn't going to give me the tape. No. They would have given it to the Casselberry Police. But their theory was that my son had just left on his own, and they treated the case like a runaway rather than a missing person. They kept telling me, right, that he probably just left on his own, or he's with a girlfriend or something, and he'll come back home, or that kind of thing. Not like a missing person case.
They thought that he would be home at any time. Maybe you had mentioned something to them about him, and his girlfriend. Oh, he's just down about his girlfriend. He'll just be back in a couple days. And right. Geraldine, you should know that happens a lot. A lot of cases all over the United States, not just here in Florida, but all over the United States, where police are very dismissive about the concerns of families when it comes to missing persons, especially at the beginning. Whether it's a man or woman, it doesn't really matter. It's almost like they try to talk themselves out of taking interest in the case.
Well, it could be that, or maybe they just don't know what to do.
Yeah, well, that's possible as well. I agree with that. That's possible. So let's get back to the car. You had found the receipt from Winn-Dixie, which was a decent lead. Didn't get the videotape, but at least he was there, cashed his check. In the car, though, you found, I want to ask you this. We know that he went through the drive-thru at this Crystal's restaurant. This is, guys, right. I guess, a place like a hamburger place. Once again, I'm not familiar with it. Hamburger place, French fries, like you said, like Burger King.
Right.
or
Right.
McDonald's. Was any wrappers, any signs of food, anything like that, a cup found in the car in your memory? Does any of that ring true? Did you find anything like
Nothing.
that? Not even a
Nothing
napkin?
like that was found in the car. No.
Not even a
nothing.
napkin. Okay.
No.
And this is unusual because you had told me that there was a cigar wrapper, though, that was found in the car.
Right.
Okay. Does that surprise you that your son might have been smoking cigars? Was that something that was known to you? And do you have any idea how often he did that, or when was the last time he might have done that? Any ideas?
I did know about the cigars, yes.
I mean, he's 21. What are you going to do?
Yeah, that's true. But he wasn't like, I think sometimes when he got a little upset or whatever, then he would smoke the cigar. It wasn't like he was just smoking all the time. Mm-hmm. But I did know that he did smoke the cigars, yes.
Okay. So would you say that he usually kept his car in pretty good condition?
Yes, he did. He really liked his car, so yes, he did.
Mm-hmm. And so does that wrapper just sitting there, maybe on the passenger seat, maybe in the console in between, maybe on the floor, maybe surprise you a little bit that it might have been in there?
Well,
I mean, I know the listeners know this is how I ask questions. I like to be very thorough because we're just trying to figure out, well, if he kept his car in pretty good condition, why would he leave that cigar wrapper sitting there?
Well, at the time, I didn't think anything about it because when they said they just found the little, that clear cigar wrapper with his fingerprints on it, I didn't think anything about the wrapper being in there. I really didn't.
Never occurred to you.
I really smoked the cigars. They say they found it. I didn't really think anything about that.
Okay, that's fine. I'm not saying it should. It's just something that's interesting because, as I told you in a prior conversation, that the cigar wrapper is in the car, but all of those wrappers that he probably collected going through the drive-thru, because we know he didn't go home to eat, that he ate in the car, maybe, but none of that ended up in the car.
Right.
So it just seems a little strange that he would throw those things out if that's what he did. It's some trash can somewhere, but he wouldn't take the cigar wrapper and throw that out as well. Just something to think about for the listeners to contemplate. Now, there was another receipt that was found in the car, and this is just something we talked about before we did this interview. And I feel I have to ask you this because this is on the public record, and because I will, in a couple different places, it says that Greg might have been armed at the time that he disappeared. Can you explain how that came up? Because it started with this other receipt, once again, that wasn't thrown away like other things, that was in the car that was found. What can you tell the listeners about that receipt?
There was a receipt for a gun that was purchased at a pawn shop, and I never saw the gun. I didn't know that my son had a gun. But when Casselberry Police followed up on that, they went to the pawn shop, and the guy, and I don't know the name of the pawn shop. I think he said it was in Apopka, which is another little small town. There are a lot of little small towns all clustered together around Orlando. That when he took the receipt there, the guy said he remembered Greg and that Greg brought the gun back and said that the gun didn't work. That's as much as I can say about the gun.
Okay, you don't know if the guy, the pawn shop owner, actually took the gun back or didn't want to take. I don't know what their policy is as far as selling things. He might have said, "Hey, buyer beware. If it doesn't work, it's not my problem." We just don't know about that.
I don't know because I don't know what the policy was. I would think that pawn shops. I don't know. I don't deal with pawn shops, so I don't really know what their policy is about taking merchandise back.
Okay. I wouldn't expect you to. But do you have any idea how this sequence of events between Greg going to get this gun and then him bringing it back and then his disappearance. Do you know the time frame of all that? Was that over the course of a month or 6 months? How do you remember that? What do you think?
Actually, it wasn't 6 months. No. I would say probably maybe 3 to 4 weeks. Someone in that area. It was close. It was close. It wasn't far away. It wasn't like 6 months or 3 months or 4 months. No, it wasn't. It wasn't that far away.
Okay, so
it was close.
Within a month, so it's fairly close. And once again, you didn't know that he had a gun in his possession. Even if he gave it back, you didn't even know when he originally had it. Since 2000, did any of his friends or maybe his younger brother ever say, you know what, I knew that Greg got a gun at that time? And
no.
Nobody's ever said that to you?
Nobody has ever said that to me. Nobody has ever told me that they have seen him with a gun. And as I said, I didn't know he had a gun. I never saw the gun. When I did discover or was told that the receipt was there for the gun, the first thing that came in my mind was that he may have been afraid because he was getting off so late at night, or I guess we could say early morning, and he was by himself. He had to walk to the parking lot by himself. And the way that this theater is set up, the parking lot is kind of like on the side or the back of the theater. It's not like it's right there in the front where you walk out and you get in your car. So my thoughts were that he was probably afraid when he was out there alone at night by himself.
Okay, perfectly reasonable, position, theory. We just don't know. All we know is he never expressed any fear to you that somebody would have been after him or anything like that you can remember.
No, he never expressed that to me. No, he did not.
Okay. All right. Once again, going back to the car, do you remember at what time the car was originally seen in Sun City? It wasn't like a day later that it was first seen. It was only very early that next morning. What can you tell the listeners about that?
I think it was like 4 a.m.? It was really early in the morning. You're right. But when the Tampa police, I think that was either Tampa police or the highway patrol. I'm not exactly sure who handles things like that.
Mm-hmm.
At first, they didn't realize that the car was a missing person's car. So they just kind of left it there. And as I said before, when they realized that it was a missing person's car, then they had it towed to their pounding area or wherever they keep the cars that they tow.
Right. Just to put this in the timeline now for the listeners, we have him going to the theater, getting his check. We have a receipt that he was at Winn-Dixie at what time? 7, did you say? He was at
7.
7
or a little after 7.
A little after 7. He's in the Casselberry area, which is on the east side of Orlando, northeast technically. In that area, cashing his check. And then at some point, probably not too long after that, he goes and gets this food. Let's say that's 7:30. So, like 8.5 hours later, his car is seen in Sun City, which is like 2 hours away. So it was fairly quick. If he just decided to pick up and drive to Sun City, he must have made that decision, right very quickly for the car to get into that area. Of course, we just don't know what has happened. All I'm trying to set up is that the car got from the Casselberry area to Sun City fairly quickly. It wasn't over wasn't discovered a week later. The car was there as cited by police at approximately 4:30 on January 19th. I know that you had thought about, what is the possibility, if it was Greg that drove the car over here, did he know anybody in this area, of the Tampa area, Hillsborough County, Pinellas County, Sun City, Ruskin, those areas? Did he know anybody over this way? Because I live in the Tampa area.
No, not in that area. Tampa, he had one friend who went to college with him, but I was in contact with him. He was in contact with me, and he didn't see Greg. He was actually in Tampa. He lived actually in the city of Tampa, not in that area where the car was found. And he said he did not hear anything from Greg. He did not see Greg. He actually didn't know that Greg was missing until I called him and asked him about had he seen Greg or anything.
To your knowledge, had Greg ever been to the Sun City area before? Any of that area? Would
No.
that area be new to him?
It was new to him, and plus it was surprising to me because when I discovered that Sun City was a retirement community, he had no reason to be there because they're mostly retired people. When we went to visit Sun City, we saw that it was mostly retired people in the area, and there was no reason for him to go there.
Yes. In fact, you have an interesting story about when you were walking around. I'm guessing this happened at the same time that you talked to this woman that worked at the restaurant who said she saw the car but didn't see him. You ran into a guy there who said that he was going to try to help you find Greg. How did that happen, and did anything come of that?
Well, I can say what he told me. Nothing concrete came from it, but he had his idea of what possibly had happened. He said, well, we took the car back to Sun City so he could look at the car, and he had another friend with him, and they stood there, and he said that someone else was in the car, that Greg wasn't in the car by himself. That's what his senses or feelings were telling him.
So this guy was proposing or calling himself some sort of psychic or medium or something like that?
Right. He said he had helped the police before find missing people. So he said he had been helpful to the police. He wanted to help us. He didn't charge us anything. He just wanted to help us. So we went there with the car, and of course, he walked around the car. He looked at the car. He said, according to how he felt, that someone had been on the passenger side of the car.
And how did you run into this guy? What do you remember? And once again, it's been over 18 years. I understand that. Was he one of the restaurants that you went into, or did you?
No.
Okay.
This is so unusual. He actually contacted me because he had seen one of the flyers.
Oh, okay.
That we had left, and then he contacted me and said that he wanted to help me because he had helped the police before with missing person cases, and he saw that my son was missing, and he wanted to help me. Okay, he says yes. He didn't charge anything, which he really didn't. He said, I don't charge for anything. I'm just doing this because I want to help. So we went there and we took the car. He said, you need to bring the car so we can kind of get a feeling of what was going on. So we did take the car.
And those were his feelings that somebody was on the passenger side.
On the passenger side. But he never got to really help us all the way through because then he got sick and he had to have surgery. So he wasn't able to continue with us to help us. And he was an older guy already. So I would say that he was probably in his 60s when he called us that he was going to help us. So when he told us that he had gotten ill and that he was sorry he couldn't, then, I really felt bad because I was anticipating that he really, really was going to help us. And maybe we would find out some information that we didn't know, which we did find one thing that we didn't know. And then we really still don't know that, but that's what he was saying. That.
Right. How long did this correspondence go with this guy, and when was the last time you talked to him? Has this guy since passed away? Did you retain contact with him? Anything like that?
I didn't retain contact with him after that. We only took the car there once, and it wasn't that we stayed in contact with him for a long period of time, because after he contacted me and he said, well, if you bring the car, then we can tell, what happened, or if there was somebody else there. So we took the car. He gave us the information. And just a short time later, when I contacted him again, he said that he had to have surgery and he wasn't going to be able to, continue with helping us. So.
And you never heard from him again? Never heard from him again?
No, I didn't.
Okay. You never tried to call him after that, or were you expecting him to maybe call you after he was done with his surgery, or you just weren't interested in talking to him? Or my listeners are going to say, well, Ed probably thinks that's fairly suspicious, and I do, but it only matters what you think about this, and I'm just wondering how you followed through with that. You just kind of let it go after that?
I did. I just kind of let it go. I didn't. I was kind of wondering whether this was all true or whatever he was saying. But at the time, it's like any little bit.
Sure.
Any little thing we thought was helpful. But, Of course, when you go to the police for information, unless you got some kind of proof or something, they're not going to use it. So, It really didn't help at all.
Okay. Speaking of the police, did they do any forensics on the car before, of course, you got it back? Did they do any forensics on it all, try to take any fingerprints, anything like that before you got the car back?
The report from Casselberry Police concerning fingerprints was that they only found fingerprints, or they were only able to recover fingerprints that were on this little cigar wrapper. That's how I know about the cigar wrapper in the car, was because the cigar wrapper, they said, were Greg's fingerprints. So they said there were no other fingerprints that they could recover from the car. I thought that was kind of strange, but, they say it's not easy to recover fingerprints.
So they could get and we all know a cigar is not that big, and of course the plastic on it would of course be ripped or shredded or something like that from the cigar being taken out. The police are telling you they could get a fingerprint of Greg's off that, but they're telling you that they couldn't get any fingerprints off the steering wheel, the gear shift, the radio, the door handle, nothing like that.
That's what they said.
So either they're maybe possibly incompetent, which is possible, or maybe the car was actually wiped down. Maybe somebody else wiped it down and nothing could be found.
Okay. I posed that question to them.
Yeah.
I was told that it's not that easy to wipe off fingerprints. That it's not like when you're watching a movie and they're showing you how they're getting the fingerprints from items or whatever. It says it's not that easy to wipe off fingerprints. So they couldn't recover fingerprints. They didn't feel like the car had been wiped down.
But they couldn't get any fingerprints. Was Greg the only person who ever drove that car? Did you ever drive his car? His brother was younger. I don't know if he was driving age or not. Did anybody else ever drive his car?
I had driven his car before. His dad had driven his car. Greg has driven his car. And I don't know if he ever allowed any of his friends to drive his car or not. But yes, there should have been other fingerprints in the car.
There should have been tons of fingerprints in the car.
Yes.
Okay. So we just don't know about that. Either the police don't know what they're doing or something else. It's hard to tell right at this second. It just seems funny to me they could get a fingerprint off of a cigar wrapper and not off an entire car. Okay. The police, like you said, wanted to dismiss this, that Greg ran away. And at any point since 2000, have they ever changed their opinion on that? Maybe giving you another theory, because we have a little more to go. We're going to talk about, some other possibilities. But the police themselves, to this day, do they think that Greg still ran away?
It's kind of hard to tell, because when I go there frequently, maybe once every 6 months or so, and ask them about information about my son. And what they tell me is that, we have him in the system as a missing person, and if anything pops up, then we'll know that something is going on. But right now, it's like a dead end. There is nothing to the case. They have nothing to go on. So I'm not sure how they're really thinking, other than the fact that they have nothing to go on.
Okay. Well, in a way, I kind of understand. I guess understand that. But we are going to talk about now some possibilities that certainly would take us in the opposite direction of believing that Greg just kind of took off. We're going to talk about some people actually that he knew and their behavior. We've already talked about one of them, but we're going to talk about him again. But I want to start off with a guy. His name is Angel Rosario, Rosario. Who is he, and how did Greg know him?
Angel is the brother of a friend, Marlene, who was Greg's friend. And Greg often visited Marlene at her home with her, her parents and all. And her brother, of course, lived with them. He was a year or two older than they were. And Greg would sometimes go there, and he said that he had played Nintendo with Angel. When the police were given Angel's name as one of the friends to just question and see if he knew anything about what happened with Greg that night, because I suspected that maybe he had gone to Marlene's house because she lived very close to the Winn-Dixie where he cashed his check.
Sure.
Well, when they first contacted or tried to contact Angel, the mother would not, they were on the phone. They didn't really go to the home. The mother covered for her son. She said he was not there, and we were wondering why he wouldn't be there. This was a school time. But anyway, he was not there. He had gone to Atlanta, but he left. He just left that evening, and he went to Atlanta. And she said that Greg wasn't their friend, and they didn't even allow Greg to come in their house. He had to stand outside and talk. And I was wondering, why would she say that when it was not true? I know that was not true. So what was it that she was trying to cover for her son?
Did you know her? Being that this Angel was a friend of Greg's, had you at any occasion met this woman before Greg disappeared? Did you two ever have a conversation somewhere? Hey, our son's
No, I had never met the mother. I had not met Angel. I only met the sister, Marlene Rosario. I only met her.
Okay.
She had come to the house. Sometimes they come and visit and talk or whatever, and I'm at home. So I did meet her. I never met her brother. But my son told me far, far before any of this ever happened, actually when he was still in high school, this disappearance happened after he was in college. But when he was in high school, he told me that when he would go to Marlene's house, that he would sometimes play Nintendo with her brother. and they would play Nintendo together. I think that was the game, but anyway,
Okay.
they would play together. But then when the mother was questioned by the detective, she pretended like she didn't even know Greg, or she didn't even like Greg, or she didn't even want him at her house, that kind of thing. So I
Very
felt kind of
curious.
suspicious about that.
Very, I would say that's very suspicious. Have you, since 2000, ever had a chance to contact Angel? Do you know what he has done since 2000? What kind of guy he is? Anything like that?
I have not made any contact with Angel. I have talked to Marlene.
And what'd she say? What did she say? Have you ever asked her point blank? Why did your mother say that Angel didn't know, Greg, and it was never over her house? Why did your mother do that?
Marlene doesn't know about that conversation, but I did ask her, did she see Greg the night that he disappeared? Did she know anything, or anybody that knew anything about his disappearance? And she said no. That's as far as I got with her. I don't know Angel. I personally have never met Angel. Name came up because, like I said, previous to all of this happening, my son would talk to me about Marlene. He talked to me when he went to her house. So, it was just conversation for us. I never thought that this would happen and that there would have to be lies about it. It just kind of seems suspicious to me. And I did share that with the Casselberry Police. But, again, their hands are tied. They can't go to somebody's house and say, okay, we suspect that your son did this. At least that's what I was told. So they had to accept whatever she said.
Do you think that Marlene is a good person? Do you think that she's an honest person? And have you ever thought about, asking her, why did your mother say all those things back in the year 2000? That's not true. You at least get Marlene's. It's been 18 years. If she was, Greg's age at 21, at 21, she'd be in her late 30s now, grown woman, maybe married, has kids, who knows? Have you ever thought about just asking, why'd your mother say that stuff back in 2000? They're lies.
I did not ask her that.
Okay. Well, maybe that, that might be something to think about. But we've talked about Angel, and surely what his behavior and his mother's behavior, not so much Marlene's, but Angel's and his mother's behavior is very strange. Now,
I think it is.
Yeah. Now we have Michael Johnson, who we've already talked about once, but maybe you need to start from the beginning with how Greg and Michael knew each other, the kind of friendship that they had, and then please once again reiterate what happened after Greg disappeared. First of all, how did Mike and Greg know each other?
They were high school classmates. They went to high school together, and they became friends, very close friends, so close that they called each other cousins. Michael frequently came to my house. Sometimes he had dinner. Sometimes he had problems at home with his mother, and he would come to my house and stay overnight or whatever. Sometimes he said that he got locked out or all these things were going on. I really didn't know his mother that well. I had talked to her, but if there was something that was going on there, I wasn't going to discuss it with her because I didn't know how true it was. But he and Greg were so close friends that Michael was always with him. Wherever he went, Michael was there. He used to leave home in the morning, go pick Michael up from his house, and bring him to school. And sometimes he was even late for school doing that. Michael was always in the car when Greg came home in the evening. He would always have Michael there. They would come home. Maybe they'd play a little game or something, play basketball. We had a basketball hoop, eat dinner or whatever, and then he would take Michael home. They were always together. And even when I went to a conference at school at Lyman, and the teacher said that Greg's cousin, Michael, and I said, well, they're not really cousins. She said, well, they call themselves cousins. I said, well, that just shows how close the relationship is, that they're calling each other cousins. It means that they are so close that they are like family. So it was very unusual to me that Michael would not contact me or say anything. Once Greg disappeared, I never heard from Michael again. I never heard from him again.
And when you say that never again, you mean from January 18th, 2000 to today, which is February 5th, 2018, over 18 years, you've not said one word, or he's not said one word to you in that time.
That is exactly true.
Wow.
I have seen Michael's brother, which I did talk to him, which was recently, probably about 4 years ago. And I asked him, did he know anything about Greg's disappearance?
Of course.
And he said no. And I told him that I needed to talk to Michael. I don't have contact information for Michael. And Michael Johnson is such a common name that it's kind of hard unless I know where he's living and all that, that you really just kind of look him up. I did go on Facebook for Michael Johnson, but I didn't see, there were so many that popped up that it was really difficult. But I did tell his brother is Chris, and I said, Chris, I would like to talk to Michael. You may tell him that I'm at the same address and I have the same telephone number, so please contact me. Now, I'm not sure whether he got that message or not, but I've never heard from him at all.
And do you, even if you don't know how to contact him, have you ever heard anything about him through the grapevine since 2000 about, what he's done with his life? Has he been in any trouble? I guess the same way with Angel. Any of these guys, either of these guys have any trouble with the law? And maybe I should ask you this. Did Angel and Michael know each other? Were they good friends too?
Yes.
Or they were?
Yes, they did. And one of the things that the police did call Michael and ask him about were Greg, the way they questioned it was like, were Angel and Greg, enemies or anything like that? And Michael said, no, they were cool. Well, cool means, they got along okay.
Yes.
So now there's another suspicion that Angel's mom is saying all this stuff. Well, they never got to talk to Angel. They never talked to Angel. That Angel's mom is saying all this stuff. And then when he calls Michael on the phone and say, hey, you know about Greg? Well, I'm trying to find out what kind of relationship did Angel and Greg have? Oh, yeah, they were cool. Did they play Nintendo and games sometime? Oh, yeah, everybody was cool. We would go there together or whatever. So now, here in my mind, again, why is she saying that? What is she trying to cover for her son? But then Casselberry Police was like, we don't have any evidence about anything. We can't just go to her house and do whatever. So here we have information that we can't do anything with. So that's just the way it was.
Do you know if the Casselberry Police even talked to Michael Johnson?
They talked to Michael. They told me that they did. They asked Michael about Angel.
Oh.
And their relationship, and Greg's relationship with Angel, to see if it was true, because I told them, I said, well, Michael always goes everywhere with Greg, and I'm pretty sure he would know if there was a problem with Angel and Greg. So when they talked to Michael, Michael said there was no problem with Angel and Greg, that they were cool. They got along okay.
So you have two guys that were in Greg's life as friends who, since he disappeared, neither of them has ever expressed any sympathy to you, never even sent you a card in the mail.
No, never, not even a phone call, not even just come by the house. Not even just say, well, Ms. Brooks, we're sorry. I'm sorry to hear that Greg is missing. Nothing at all.
Okay. And once again, we need to remind the listeners that Angel was the brother of Marlene, who was
Yes.
a girl that was also friends with Greg. Did you tell me at one time Greg and Marlene might have been a couple at one time, maybe before he and Janet? Is that true, or?
Well, it could have been, but he never told me that he and Marlene were a couple. He always said that he and Marlene were friends because she liked to talk to him about her family problems or issues or things that were going on with her. But he never said that they were like a couple.
Okay.
So I'm not certain about that. But I do know that he and Janet were a couple.
Right. And since the beginning of 2000 when Greg disappeared, have you had a chance to talk to Janet? Now, once again, she would have been a year younger than Greg, maybe 19, 20 years old. She would also be in her late 30s. And what have your discussions with her been like, if you can say?
Okay. Janet actually came by the house. It's been a while. I'd say maybe 7 or 8 years ago. She came by the house with her fiance. She came by to ask me about Greg. Had we found out any information, and to say that she was sorry about how things happened, and she just wanted to know, had we found out anything or any information about Greg. So we sat there and talked for a while, and I did ask her a few questions, and I said, well, is this the young man who, she knew that Greg was really sad about what happened with her, with the breakup.
Yeah, sure.
And now she's older and she can see things differently, and she said she was sorry about that. The young man who was with her, who is her fiance, was not the person that she and Greg broke up for. He wasn't the one, but now he was the person that she was marrying, at that time. But yes, she did. She came by the house, and sometimes she would call and ask, how was everything, or did we hear anything about Greg, or she was sorry, and she was sorry about how things happened and, how he felt and how things turned out. Yes, she did express, that she was sorry and concerned.
Okay. And once again, she was the at the time a young woman, who was at the Winn-Dixie that night. Just to remind the listeners, she was the one that stopped by your house with her fiance, asked about Greg, but she's also the girl that was working that night at Winn-Dixie. She's the ex-girlfriend. She was there when Greg went in and cashed his check.
Correct.
Okay. All right, so we went through a possibilities. It's always strange. In fact, the case I just covered this past week, it's always strange when somebody who's involved with somebody, suddenly doesn't come around anymore after the person disappears. It's always suspicious. Always. So since 2000, you've talked about the police. No leads whatsoever. They feel kind of handcuffed, even if there's a possibility of Angel and Mike or Michael or both together, because there's not any proof. There was no forensics in the car. We don't know if their whereabouts for that night of January 18th, 2000. We don't know where they were. Maybe they've been asked, but we don't know what the answer is. Is it a possibility that Angel and or Michael knew somebody in that area? Did they do something to Michael? Did they have a fight out of nowhere and they wanted to ditch the car? We just don't know. It's going to be up to the listeners to decide for themselves. But you did say that, we had this gun purchase that you didn't know about. And then we know, like you said, that he was suffering some depression. He was sad about this breakup, as many young people get when they get breakup, and even people my age, 47 years old, that happens. Is there any chance in your mind is there a possibility that maybe Greg might have had some sort of psychological break or something like that? What do you? I mean, did you ever see anything in his behavior in his first 21 years that would support that?
The only thing I saw in his behavior was the depression.
Mm-hmm.
And he did go to therapy for that. And he did take medication.
Okay. And if he was going to this counseling, once he disappeared, did you? I mean, I don't know what the laws would be anyway. Did you ever have a chance to talk to this person who was counseling him? Maybe what the content of? I would never ask you to say those things in public. I'm not asking that. I'm just asking you if you had an opportunity to do that. Did that person ever express any opinion on that?
I did. I did talk to the counselor. And yes, he did express his opinion. He seemed to feel that there were other things also that were causing Greg the depression, the breakup, but then there were other things also that Greg mentioned to him.
In talking to this counselor, and once again, I don't know, it's very fortunate that this counselor was able to talk to you. I don't know, we're just going to leave his name out of it because I don't know if that was legal to do or not, but I'm glad that he did, don't get me wrong. Did he ever express to you the idea that Greg might try to hurt himself? Did the counselor ever say anything that, I think your son might be suffering from some bipolar disorder, depression, paranoid schizophrenia? Did this counselor ever say anything like that in your conversation with him, if you can say?
The counselor never said anything to me of that nature, that he would be harmful to himself or anyone else.
No, and he did not think that Greg was suffering from any sort of other mental instabilities, once again, connected to maybe this girlfriend issue. We know that sometimes young people, when breakups happen, they think it's the end of the world, and we know as adults it's not. Maybe some issues going on with school, but no mental instability that the counselor thought would take Greg to the point where he might harm himself or maybe have a mental break and just suddenly take off.
No, he never indicated that to me.
Okay.
Greg was suffering from depression.
Okay. Okay, so he never expressed it to you, and to your knowledge, he never expressed it to anybody else. In fact, you would hope that he didn't, being that shouldn't be information that's given out anyway.
Right.
Okay. All right, so we have that, and the listeners, can judge that for what it's worth, but I keep going back in this disappearance to Angel and Michael and them claiming, not talking much or not talking at all, not expressing any condolences to you and Greg disappearing. So, listeners are going to add that up for themselves. We talked earlier about Greg's younger brother, Jermaine. How has he handled this over the last 18 years?
It has been very difficult for Jermaine. I can see that Jermaine is still angry about the situation. He's angry because his brother is not here. He's angry because he doesn't know what has happened to him. He's angry with the police because he feels that they didn't do as much as they could to try and find Greg or find out what was going on that could have happened to him. So he still has a lot of anger, even though he is 34 at this point. It still bothers him because he's often says to me, I only have one brother and now he's gone. I don't have anybody else. So I know that he still loves his brother. He wants to know what has happened to him, and he's angry about the situation.
Would you say that he is equally as suspicious about Angel and Michael as you are?
Yes, we've discussed it. He feels that it's very unusual. Yes. He does. He feels as I feel.
And being that you told us earlier that Greg used to take Jermaine on his dates, Did Jermaine ever happen to go along with Greg when he would go over, for example, to Angels and play video games? Do you believe that's something that ever happened? Where, Jermaine would be able to say, that woman, that mother of Angel is lying. I've been over there, with Angel. Did anything like that ever happen?
No, Jermaine never went with him to Angels.
Okay.
But Greg was the kind of person, he would take the children. Well, I call them children, but all the boys. Like Greg was in middle school, and Jermaine was in middle school. Greg was in high school. So part of his responsibility was to pick up Jermaine from middle school. When he got out of school, go pick up his brother, bring him home. Sometimes I would get off work, I would pick them up. But there are about 4 Jermaine's friends who live in the neighborhood and would come, with him. But they didn't want me to pick them up, and the reason was because they said, well, when Greg pick us up, he'll take us to get something to eat. So he would pick up the young children. They weren't young children, I'm sorry, middle school. They were in middle school. Mm-hmm. He would pick them up from school, and then he would take them to Checkers or wherever, and they would get something to eat. And that's what they liked. I would pick them up and bring them straight home. So they'll say, oh, why did you come today to pick us up? We wanted Greg to come. And I was like, okay, so why do you want Greg to come? Because he always takes us to get something to eat. So he was that kind of person. He just liked the kids.
Yeah. Yeah, he sounds like a good guy. Greg sounds like a good guy. No doubt about it. No doubt.
Greg was a good guy. Yeah. My son was raised as a Christian. They went to church all the time. He sang in the choir. He worked in the nursery taking care of the little kids. He was a good guy.
Yeah. And that's what makes his disappearance that more puzzling, for sure.
Yes, it does.
Sure.
For everyone who knows him, it is just so unusual that something like this would happen.
Yeah.
Anybody who knows Greg.
Comes out of nowhere.
Yes. Just out of nowhere. Just wake up one day and your son's not here anymore.
Yeah. Where can the listeners go to find out more about Greg? Do you have a Facebook page, a website? Of course, in the lead up, the listeners will now know, but in the lead up to this interview, this episode, I was, of course, sending them to various places and posting pictures in all the places where I am on social media. But where can they go to find more about Greg, find out more about him?
Well, he's with the missing persons, missing adults.
Okay, NAMUS.
Website.
He's on NAMUS.
He's on NAMUS.
Okay.
Yes, and the national website for missing persons, missing adults. He's on that website also.
Okay.
I do not have a Facebook page for him.
Okay. Well, that's your choice. That's totally fine. Talk to a lot of people who don't have one, so that's fine. But I will be pointing people in the directions. I know that his profile is on my friend Megan Good's site, charleyproject.org as well, which is a very popular missing person site. She has a couple pictures of him and the contact information for the police. So the listeners can go there as well. Any final thoughts or comments you have, Geraldine, before we conclude this interview?
I would just like for anybody who has any information about my son to please come forward to share what you have. Even if you think it's not important, then it could very well be important. I've been wondering all these years what has happened, and I know that someone knows something. There's got to be somebody out there that knows something, and if you do, please come forward and help. Tell what you know so that we can find my son or find out what has happened to him. That's what I would like to know. I would like to have closure. So I would appreciate if anyone could do that.
I, of course, totally agree with that. I'm hoping that the listeners do know something. Maybe something will ring a bell. Maybe one of them knows Angel Rosario. Maybe one of them knows the actual Michael Johnson that we've talked about in this interview. Of course, here in Florida, I have a lot of listeners, being that I live here, and I want to continue to work with you in any way I can, Geraldine, to get some answers for you. In fact, I have some suggestions that I'm not going to say on the air. We'll talk about them afterwards. Some steps you might be able to take in the upcoming months to try to get a little closer to the answers. But I deeply appreciate you being on this episode of Unfound.
Thank you very much for interviewing me, and thank you very much for taking the interest in the case for my missing son, Greg.
Geraldine, you're welcome. And that was my February 5th, 2018 interview with Geraldine Brooks, mother of Roy Gregory Brooks Jr. I thank her for appearing. I've produced a new map analysis video for Greg's disappearance. Please find it on Unfound's YouTube channel. Probably every interview I've ever done, when I go back and listen to it, I discover something that should have been further examined, an additional question or two that should have been asked, a suspect whose background needed to be better understood. In listening to Geraldine, one thing we did not touch upon was that $200 he received from cashing his check at Winn-Dixie, something he never did. What happened to that money? I guess it wasn't in the car, or Geraldine would have mentioned it. So where is it? Does it make sense that Greg ran off with it? Or does it make more sense that someone caused Greg's disappearance due to the $200, then ditched his car where police found it? Another topic that wasn't covered thoroughly, yes, Geraldine established that Greg had never been to the Sun City/Ruskin area before, but did anybody check his computer to see if he ever looked up that area? And yes, this was before Google. So maybe a Yahoo search or even a Dogpile search. Remember that site? Did Greg do this? Did anybody check? We don't know. We don't know if that was ever researched. The issue overall is 100 miles and 2 hours is a long time to be on a manic type trip. If that is what happened to Greg, he's out, he sees his ex, he's already fighting depression. Something clicks in his brain that causes Greg to make a bad decision. But for 2 hours? Whereas our experience at Unfound is we've certainly had a set of facts similar to Greg's in other disappearances. However, although the person may still be missing, the car is found nearby, maybe a few miles away. Or if the distance is more than a few miles, it is parked in a place familiar to the missing person, like what happened with Jamie Valdez's car. Greg's disappearance is certainly the opposite of that. On top of this, if Greg left his car there, he put it at one of the busiest intersections in that area. Whereas to tap into our knowledge again in these situations, cars are usually found out on dirt roads or at least out of the way. Yep, hard to understand. But let's use our minds, our now more experienced minds, to figure out what can be done now, 23 years later. If you'd like to read and hear my further in-depth analysis of Greg Brooks's and all of Unfound's other disappearances, please sign up at patreon.com/Unfound Podcast. I'll leave the public theorizing up to you. And that's the program. Right now, while you are in your podcast platform, Spotify, YouTube, iTunes, wherever, Give Unfound a 5-star review, a thumbs up, whatever that platform allows. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Densel, and you've just finished this episode of Unfound.